So that stimulus is not going well.
Wait, what stimulus?
Well, so last year, China, there's this big announcement about stimulus, and they poured something like the equivalent of $780 billion worth of stimulus into the Chinese real estate market. The idea was to fix all the problems, and China's real estate market would be healthy again after many years of, a bunch of different sort of seismic crises, the Evergrande one being probably the biggest. That's basically the collapse of that real estate market.
So the solution to state intervention in the economy was just more state intervention to the economy.
Yeah, well, the idea is that, there's a lot of developments that were unfinished. Mm-hmm. And so if you pour money into those developments that are unfinished and then they can get finished, then you heal those things.
Are those ones that were already paid for or not?
Well, the problem is that a lot of these developers, they would promise to build a project. They would pre-sell the units to Chinese citizens, and that money would supposedly be used to build the developments. And on top of that, those companies were getting bank loans to build. But there had been so much over-promising, and this is the case with Evergrande as well as others, that the developers were using the money that Chinese people were paying that they thought was, my $100,000 I'm paying for this condo is to build the building that my condo is in. But in fact, Evergrande was using it to finish construction projects that had been promised previously to other people in other developments that they still didn't have the money to complete.
So it was basically a Ponzi scheme.
It was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. And then you had like Chinese people who had bought a house that does not exist and they were paying mortgage
right
for it.
So, and then, what do? If you're not living in the place, you just walk away from it. You put down your down payment and you've paid some of the mortgage payments, but then eventually you realize like this is never happening. So you just walk away. And then this becomes a crisis because it lowers the value of all the properties if lots of people are walking away, right? Because it tells the market that there's weak demand, prices fall. And when prices fall, then developers can't sell new units or can't sell them for as much and therefore can't afford to finish the developments they're already working on.
I mean, there's a lot of problems with Chinese real estate. Like, it's not actually a good investment in China because even if you own an apartment, the market is so screwed up, like you can't actually really sell it easily.
Right.
It's not liquid, I guess,
so,
is the word.
Yeah, there's very little turnover. So in the U.S., if you own a unit and you price it according to the market, you should be able to sell it within a year easily, often within a few months. But in China, you just may not be able to find a buyer at all.
I mean, essentially, real estate was used as a place for people to park their money.
Right.
I mean,
it was the only way outside of the stock market. It was like the only way that the middle class of China could invest their money.
And then unfortunately, that also spooled out to real estate companies starting to make their own unregulated financial products.
No.
So then you had real estate companies then creating, things that you could invest in, right? Where they promised you, now you're not even buying an apartment or anything.
You're buying something the equivalent of like a share in a development that you don't actually get a piece of.
And then they're promising like 20% returns, like something 15% returns, something like crazy.
Someone promising 15% returns, that shouldn't be a red flag of any kind.
Well, they're full of red flags in China. You got a little bit of coffee. I have some seed oil that could probably fix that right up.
Yeah.
So buy some. But GDP, like, was it a third of the GDP? Real estate was about a third of the GDP, right?
Something like that.
It was a huge chunk.
Yeah. So that's a huge problem. And I want to get back to the stimulus.
Yeah.
So in 2024, they've poured an enormous amount of money into the stimulus. But the problem is it's not working. And I have some notes about this, which I wanted to just, So basically the housing completions, which is the number of new units that have been completed, and can be used, housing completions in 2024 fell by 27% from the previous year. So that's an enormous dip. That means that despite all the stimulus, units just weren't being completed. And on top of that, total developer financing declined 17% year on year.
You got to provide context for these numbers, because remember, I was spelling boobies on my calculator in math school.
Yeah. Okay. So the development financing is basically like how much money these developers are getting from the banks and other sources, but mostly probably from banks to get financing to complete these things. Because the way the stimulus works is it's typically not a handout from the central government. It's the central government telling banks, including local banks, to make these loans, and the government backs the loans, or the government, buys the loans. The way that in the U.S. you have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, guaranteeing loans. So basically, the central government's pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into this, telling the banks to go make these loans. But the developers they're even when they're taking the money, they're often not using that money to finish the projects they promised to finish. They're using it to make back pay for people who haven't been paid in 2 years, or they're using it for other things, and it's not actually finishing the units. And so you'd have to provide an incredible increase in that amount of stimulus in order to just finish the things that have been promised. But I don't see how that can happen, because not only would you need an enormous amount more stimulus, but there's also no guarantee that that's going to even get if the stimulus isn't working now, it's not going to work if you increase it, because there's so much corruption in that system. I just don't see how doing more of the same thing is going to change the result.
I think some of the problems with the stimulus is the banks are wary of lending to some of the most troubled property developers.
Right, as they should be.
Which they should be. But then you can't really shore up the weakest parts of the industry, right? If the property developers that are having the most trouble completing their projects are not getting money because they're the biggest risk, then you're not really helping.
Fortunately, the banks have to listen to the government.
Well, no, I mean, the government is there's some strict requirements for what kind of developers that the banks can lend to. The developers can't have any outstanding huge legal issues, or they can't be having that escrow problem where they have uncompleted stuff that they still haven't paid for. And so then if you say you can't lend to places like that, then essentially the people who have been getting the stimulus money have been state-owned companies.
Right.
So it's the state paying itself,
right,
or loaning money to itself, but the state-owned companies are the most stable,
right,
already.
But basically, it's a whole racket too, because individuals who are connected with the government at various levels, are the ones who are getting the stimulus money.
The private firms can't get the money, essentially.
Right. And so it also means that your average Chinese citizen who put their life savings into a condo that has not been built yet is not going to get their money back, and they're also not going to get their condo, because there's just and even if the government tried to just do that, there's no way to do that. There's no way to finance it, because where's the central government getting money from? Anyway, it's from taxpayers, right? Largely. So there's just not going to be enough money in that system to reimburse people. So at the end of the day, the average Chinese middle class person is going to lose. There's just no way they're going to win against this massive corrupt system. that has cheated them out of their money, that has cheated them out of their housing, and that is so corrupt at its core that even a government stimulus package aimed probably to resolve it so that people don't protest is just not going to get the money into the right hands.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this highlight from our podcast, but there's a lot more. The full hour-long show is available on our website, ChinaUncensored.tv, and when you subscribe, you'll also get premium China Uncensored episodes, live streams, and a community chat with me, Shelley, and Matt, and hundreds of subscribers. And most importantly, you'll be supporting content you love. Check it out. The link is below.